The stars had always watched over humanity. For centuries, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They built rockets. They colonized the moon. They spread to Mars and beyond. By the year 2847, humans had settlements on 12 different worlds. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The Valorian Empire had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. Their eyes glowed a pale yellow, and they had never known defeat. They had conquered over 600 different species. Some they enslaved, others they simply destroyed. The Valorians believed they were the masters of all living things. When their scout ships found Earth, they saw exactly what they expected to see. A small blue planet filled with soft creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. Admiral Zethnar, commander of the Third Imperial Fleet, looked at the reports and smiled. This would be easy. This would be fun. He did not bother to send a warning. The Valorians never did. Warnings were for equals, and no species was equal to them. 16 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the human colony of New Geneva on Mars. Each ship was the size of a small city. Covered in weapons that could melt mountains, the Valorians expected screaming. They expected surrender. They expected fear. Commander Jack Morrison was drinking coffee on the bridge of the USS Defiance when the alarms started screaming. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the military for 30 years, and he had seen many things, but he had never seen ships like the ones appearing on his screen. 16 contacts, Lieutenant Kate Sullivan said from her station. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. They're big. Really big. Nothing in our database matches them. Morrison put down his coffee and stood up slowly. He walked to the main viewing screen and looked at the alien vessels. They were ugly things. Covered in spikes and weapons, they looked like they were built for one purpose only: war. They're hailing us, Kate said. Put it through. The screen flickered, and a Valorian face appeared. Admiral Zethnar looked at Morrison like a man might look at an insect. He spoke in a harsh voice that the translation software struggled to process. Primitive creatures. You are now property of the Valorian Empire. Surrender your world, your ships, and your lives. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. The bridge went silent. Every officer looked at Morrison, waiting to see what he would do. Some of them were scared. Some of them were angry. Morrison just smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigarette. He lit it slowly, took a long drag, and blew smoke toward the screen. The Valorian admiral watched with confusion. This was not how conquered species behaved. Here's the thing, Morrison said calmly. You don't know us. You don't know what we've done to each other over the last 10,000 years. Wars. Genocide. Nuclear weapons. We've killed hundreds of millions of our own kind. We're really, really good at it. He took another drag from his cigarette. You have 1 hour to leave this system. After that, we're going to show you exactly what humanity does to things that threaten our homes. Admiral Zethnar stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, he started to laugh. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. He had never heard such words from a species marked for conquest. It was amusing. It was ridiculous. 1 hour, Zethnar said, still laughing. We will enjoy breaking you. The screen went dark. Kate looked at Morrison with wide eyes. Sir, we only have 3 ships in this sector. They have 16. We can't win this fight. Morrison smiled again. It was not a nice smile. Who said we only have 3 ships? He pressed a button on his command chair. All stations, this is Commander Morrison. Execute Protocol Nightfall. I repeat, execute Protocol Nightfall. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, something woke up. It was something humans had been building for 50 years. Something they had kept secret from everyone, including their own people. The Valorians had no idea what was coming. 58 minutes passed. Admiral Zethnar watched the human ships with amusement. They had not moved. They had not tried to run. Either they were very brave or very stupid. He suspected the second option. All ships, prepare to fire. He ordered. Destroy their vessels. Then burn their colony to ash. The Valorian weapons powered up. Hundreds of plasma cannons aimed at the three small human ships. It would be over in seconds. Then the space behind the human ships began to twist. Zethnar's eyes went wide. Something was coming through. Something big. The fabric of space itself was tearing open. And from the wound came ships unlike anything he had ever seen. They were black as night, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with inner fire. There were 12 of them, and each one was twice the size of his largest battleship. "What is this?" he whispered. Morrison's voice came through on all frequencies. "You should have listened. You should have run. Now it's too late." The human ships fired. The Valorians had never seen weapons like this. Beams of pure white light cut through their shields like they were made of paper. Missiles that seemed to bend reality itself slammed into their hulls. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles exploded in seconds. Admiral Zethnar screamed orders at his crew. "Fire back! Raise shields! Do something!" But nothing worked. The human weapons were too powerful. The human ships were too fast. His fleet was dying around him. In 20 minutes, it was over. 15 Valorian ships were gone, reduced to clouds of burning metal. Only Zethnar's flagship remained, crippled and drifting. He sat in his command chair, surrounded by dead crew members, and stared at the screen in disbelief. Morrison appeared on the screen once more. His cigarette had burned down to nothing, and his smile was gone. His eyes were cold and hard. "Go home," he said. "Tell your empire what happened here. Tell them that humanity is not prey. Tell them to stay away from our worlds, or we will come for them." The flagship's emergency systems activated, and the ship limped away into the darkness. Zethnar sat alone in the silence, trying to understand what had just happened. He had come to conquer a primitive species. Instead, he had woken something terrible, something that did not know how to surrender, something that fought like it had nothing to lose. He had made a terrible mistake, and deep in his heart, Admiral Zethnar knew the truth. The Empire had struck first, but humanity would strike last. Admiral Zethnar's ship limped through space for 3 weeks before it reached Valorian territory. He had lost most of his crew. He had lost his entire fleet. But worst of all, he had lost his pride. When he finally stood before the High Council on the Valorian homeworld, he could barely speak. High Empress Valeth sat on her throne of black stone and listened to his report. She was ancient, even by Valorian standards. Her gray skin was wrinkled, and her forearms were thin and bony, but her eyes still burned with cruel intelligence. She had ruled the Empire for over 200 years, and she had never heard a story like this. "You lost 16 ships," she said slowly, "to a species we have never heard of. A species that has only been traveling between stars for 300 years. Zethnar lowered his head in shame. "Their weapons were like nothing we have seen, High Empress. They tore through our shields. They moved faster than our tracking systems could follow. We were helpless." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Admirals and generals shouted at each other, blaming Zethnar for his failure. Some called him a coward. Others demanded his execution, but Valeth raised one thin hand, and the room fell silent. "You will not be executed," she said. "You will live with your shame. That is punishment enough." She turned to Grand Admiral Torvan, her most trusted military commander. He was younger than most of the council. With muscles that rippled under his gray skin, he had conquered 100 worlds and had never lost a single battle. "Prepare the Grand Fleet," Valeth commanded. 3,000 ships. Enough firepower to crack planets. Go to this human territory and burn everything you find. Leave nothing alive. Torvan bowed deeply. "It will be done, High Empress. These primitives will learn the price of defiance." 1 month later, the largest fleet in Valorian history departed for human space. 3,000 warships, each one carrying thousands of soldiers and enough weapons to level cities. They traveled in a formation that stretched across light years, blocking out the stars themselves. On Earth, humanity was preparing. Secretary of Defense Ben Carter stood in the Situation Room beneath the Rocky Mountains. Screens covered every wall, showing ship movements, troop positions, and intelligence reports. The room was filled with military officers and government officials, all speaking in urgent voices. General Lisa Brennan stood at the center of the room. She was a small woman with short gray hair and eyes like steel. She had spent her entire life preparing for war, and now the biggest war in human history was coming. "Our scouts have tracked the enemy fleet," she said, pointing at a holographic display. 3,000 ships. They'll reach our outer colonies in 6 weeks. The room went quiet. Everyone understood what 3,000 warships meant. The Valorians were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to destroy. Ben Carter rubbed his tired eyes. "Can we stop them?" Brennan smiled. It was a thin, dangerous smile. "That depends on whether Project Goliath is ready." In orbit above Neptune, hidden behind the giant planet's swirling storms, humanity's greatest secret was waiting. 12 dreadnoughts, each one 5 kilometers long. They were the largest ships humanity had ever built, and they carried weapons that the Valorians could not even imagine. Admiral Sam Fletcher stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, the lead dreadnought. He was a quiet man, with dark skin and calm eyes. He had never commanded a ship in real combat before. No human had ever fought an alien species. But Fletcher was not afraid. He had trained his whole life for this moment. "All ships report ready," his first officer announced. Fletcher nodded slowly. "Then we wait." 6 weeks later, the Valorian Grand Fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system. Grand Admiral Torvan stood on his bridge and looked at the human worlds with contempt. Such small planets. Such weak defenses. This would be easy. "Scan for enemy vessels," he ordered. His sensors found 12 ships waiting near the 4th planet. 12 ships against 3,000. Torvan laughed out loud. Were these humans insane? A communication signal came through. Admiral Fletcher's face appeared on the screen. He looked calm, almost bored. "This is Admiral Sam Fletcher of the United Human Fleet. You have entered our space without permission. This is your only warning. Turn around now, and we will let you live. Continue forward, and none of you will see home again." Torvan stared at the screen with disbelief. This tiny species was threatening him? With 12 ships? He had never heard anything so ridiculous. "Foolish creatures," he sneered. "You have no idea what you face. The Valorian Empire has conquered 600 species. We have destroyed entire civilizations. What makes you think you are any different?" Fletcher leaned forward slightly. His eyes were cold as ice. "Because we're humans. And we don't know how to quit." He cut the communication. Torvan snarled with anger. "All ships. Attack formation. Destroy those vessels, and then burn their worlds." 3,000 Valorian warships moved forward as one. Their weapons powered up, filling space with deadly energy. The 12 human dreadnoughts did not move. They sat perfectly still, waiting. Then the human ships opened fire. Beams of pure darkness shot from the human weapons. They were not plasma or lasers. They were something else entirely, something that bent the laws of reality. Where the beams touched Valorian ships, the ships simply stopped existing. They did not explode. They did not burn. They just vanished, as if they had never been there at all. Torvan watched in horror as his ships disappeared by the dozens. "Return fire!" he screamed. "All ships! Return fire!" The Valorian weapons found their targets. Plasma bolts and missiles slammed into the human dreadnoughts, but the human shields held. The attacks that had destroyed 1,000 worlds did nothing, absolutely nothing. For 11 hours, the battle raged. The Valorians fought with everything they had. They tried every tactic they knew. They threw wave after wave of ships at the human line. None of it mattered. When it was over, 2,800 Valorian ships were gone. The survivors fled in terror, their formations broken, their pride shattered. Grand Admiral Torvin, who had never lost a battle, sat in his damaged flagship and wept. Admiral Fletcher watched the enemy retreat. His face showed no joy, no satisfaction, just grim determination. "Send a message to Earth," he said quietly. "Tell them Phase 1 is complete. And tell them to prepare for Phase 2. Back on the Valorian homeworld, High Empress Valeth received the news in silence. Her greatest fleet had been destroyed. Her best admiral had been beaten. And the humans were still coming. For the first time in her long life, Valeth felt something she had never felt before: fear. The survivors of the Grand Fleet brought stories back to Valorian space. Terrible stories. Stories of human ships that moved like ghosts through the darkness. Stories of weapons that erased matter from existence. Stories of a species that did not know the meaning of fear. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valorian Empire was afraid. High Empress Valeth ordered every fleet to return home. She called back armies from conquered worlds. She built new defenses around the homeworld. The greatest empire the galaxy had ever known was preparing to hide behind its walls. But humanity was not interested in waiting. On Earth, the War Council met in the same underground room where they had planned their defense. General Lisa Brennan stood before the assembled leaders with a new plan. Not a plan for defense. A plan for attack. "The Valorians have enslaved hundreds of species," she said, pointing at a star map. "These species hate their masters. They've been waiting for someone to give them hope. We're going to give them something better. We're going to give them weapons." President Nicole Barrett, a tall woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, looked at the map with interest. "You want to start a rebellion?" Brennan nodded. "The Valorians can't fight us and control their slaves at the same time. If we arm the conquered species, the Empire will tear itself apart from the inside." The plan was dangerous. It would require small teams of humans to travel deep into enemy territory. Many of them would not come back. But everyone in the room understood the truth. If humanity waited for the Valorians to recover, the next attack would be even worse. "Do it," the president said. Colonel Danny Price was chosen to lead the first mission. He was a short man with a thick beard and hands covered in scars. He had spent 20 years in special operations, fighting in some of the worst places on Earth. Now he would fight in some of the worst places in the galaxy. His team of 50 soldiers traveled aboard a small stealth ship, slipping past Valorian patrols like a shadow. Their first target was a world called Crix Prime, home to an insectoid species that had been enslaved for 3,000 years. The Crix were strange creatures. They had 6 legs, 4 arms, and heads covered in compound eyes. They could not speak like humans, but their translation devices allowed simple communication. When Price and his team landed on their world, the Crix watched them with confusion. "We are not Valorians," Price said through his translator. "We are humans. We destroyed 2 of their fleets. Now we've come to help you destroy them too." The Crix leader, a massive creature with blue shell armor, stepped forward slowly. Her name was impossible for human tongues to pronounce. But her question was simple: "Why help us?" Price looked at the enslaved aliens around him. They were thin and weak, worked nearly to death in Valorian mines. But in their many eyes, he saw something he recognized: anger, hatred, the desire for revenge. "Because we know what it feels like to fight for freedom," he said. "And because the enemy of our enemy is our friend." Within weeks, the Crix rebellion began. Human weapons flooded into Crix hands. Human trainers taught Crix soldiers how to fight. When the Valorian garrison tried to restore order, they found an army waiting for them, an army that was no longer afraid. The same story repeated across the Empire. Captain Amy Turner, commanding the USS Liberty, traveled from world to world with a cargo hold full of weapons and a simple message: "The humans are here. The Empire is falling. Join us, or stay out of our way." End quote. Kreening, the aquatic Delphani rose up on their ocean worlds. The silicon-based Gorath crawled out of their caves and attacked their masters. The feathered Avrix took to the skies with human-made aircraft. Everywhere the humans went, rebellion followed. The Valorian military was stretched thin. They could not be everywhere at once. Every time they crushed one rebellion, 3 more started. Their supply lines were attacked. Their officers were assassinated. Their empire was crumbling. Back on Earth, President Barrett addressed the United Nations. The Great Hall was packed with representatives from every nation, all watching screens that showed the latest news from the front lines. The war that had started with one attack on Mars had become a galaxy-wide conflict. The Valorians thought we were just another species to conquer, Barrett said, her voice strong and clear. They thought we would kneel like all the others. They were wrong. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Old enemies sat beside old friends. Nations that had fought each other for centuries were now united against a common threat. We will not stop until the empire falls. We will not rest until every slave is free. And we will not forget what they did to our people. Her final words would echo across the galaxy for generations. They thought we were prey. They learned we were predators. Now they will learn something worse. We never forget. And we never forgive. On the Valorian homeworld, High Empress Valeth watched the human leader speak. Her hands shook with rage. How dare these primitives threaten her? How dare they turn her own slaves against her? But beneath the rage, the fear was growing. Every day brought news of another defeat, another lost world, another species rising up against Valorian rule. The empire that had stood for 12,000 years was dying, and she could not stop it. Her advisors told her to negotiate, to offer peace before it was too late. But Valeth was old and proud. She had never surrendered in her life. She would not start now. Prepare the homeworld defenses, she ordered. If the humans want war, we will give them war. Let them come. Let them try to take everything we have built. Her generals obeyed, but they knew the truth. They had seen the reports from the front lines. They had heard the stories from the survivors. The humans were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to end an empire, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. The Valorian homeworld was beautiful in a cold, cruel way. It was a planet of tall black towers and endless gray plains. The sky was always dark, lit by 3 pale moons that hung like dead eyes above the capital city. For 12,000 years, this world had been the heart of an empire. Now it would be the site of its grave. Fleet Admiral Chris Holloway stood on the bridge of the USS Conquest and looked at the planet on his view screen. He was an old man now, with white hair and a face lined with wrinkles. He had fought in the first battle over Mars. He had watched friends die in the long years of war that followed. And now, finally, he was here to end it. All ships report ready, his communications officer announced. Holloway nodded slowly. The fleet gathered around him was the largest ever assembled. 400 human dreadnoughts, each one a mountain of metal and fire, and beside them, ships from 23 other species, Krix cruisers with their insect crews, Delphani vessels that moved through space like living things, Gorath ships built from living crystal. All of them united against a common enemy. Open a channel to the planet, Holloway said. The screen flickered, and High Empress Valeth appeared. She looked older than the reports had suggested. Her gray skin was pale and thin, and her 4 arms hung limply at her sides, but her yellow eyes still burned with defiance. Admiral Holloway, she said, you have come far from your little blue world. Holloway did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stated the facts. Your fleets are destroyed. Your empire is in rebellion. Your allies have abandoned you. This is your last chance. Surrender now, and we will spare your people. Continue to resist, and we will do what we came to do. Valeth laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. You think I fear death? I have lived for 300 years. I have conquered worlds you cannot even imagine. I will not bow to primitives. Then you will burn. The screen went dark. Holloway turned to his tactical officer. All ships, attack formation. Target the orbital defenses first. Then the military installations on the surface. Avoid civilian areas if possible. The order went out across the fleet. Thousands of weapons powered up at once. The darkness of space began to glow. with the light of charging energy. And then the battle for Valoria began. The Valorians fought hard. They had spent months building defenses around their homeworld. Orbital platforms filled with plasma cannons, minefields that stretched for thousands of kilometers. A defense fleet of 500 ships, every vessel they had left. But it was not enough. Commander Megan Torres led the first assault wave. Her ship, the USS Thunder, dove through enemy fire like a bird of prey. Plasma bolts exploded around her, filling space with deadly light, but her shields held, and her weapons did not miss. "Target the command platform," she ordered. "Take out their communications." Her gunners obeyed. 3 missiles shot from her ship and crossed the distance in seconds. The Valorian command platform, a massive structure that had directed their defenses for centuries, exploded in a ball of fire. Without coordination, the Valorian defense crumbled. Ships fired at random, often hitting each other in the confusion. Platforms ran out of ammunition, with no orders to resupply. Within 6 hours, the orbital battle was over. Now came the ground assault. Sergeant Tony Vance was the first human to set foot on Valorian soil. He was a young man from a small town in Ohio, a place where the biggest news was usually about the weather. Now he was leading a squad of Marines into the capital city of an alien empire. The streets were chaos. Valorian soldiers fought desperately, firing from windows and rooftops. But the human Marines were better trained and better equipped. Their powered armor turned away enemy fire. Their weapons cut through Valorian defenses like paper. Vance led his squad through the burning streets, pushing toward the Imperial Palace. Bodies lay everywhere, human and Valorian alike. The air smelled of smoke and death. It was a nightmare come to life. But Vance did not stop. He could not stop. Not until this was finished. The battle for the capital lasted 3 days. Every street was contested. Every building was a fortress. The Valorians knew they were beaten, but they refused to surrender. They would rather die than admit defeat. On the 3rd day, Vance and his squad reached the steps of the Imperial Palace. It was a massive structure of black stone, rising into the dark sky like a monument to cruelty. Valorian guards made their last stand at the entrance, fighting with desperate fury. The battle was short and bloody. When it was over, Vance stood alone on the steps, surrounded by the bodies of friends and enemies. He was covered in ash and blood, his armor dented and scorched. But he was alive. From his pack, he pulled a small flag. Red, white, and blue. The flag of Earth. The flag of humanity. With shaking hands, he planted it on the steps of the palace. High above, Fleet Admiral Holloway watched through a drone camera. He saw the flag catch the wind. He saw the young sergeant stand at attention and salute. "It's over," someone on the bridge whispered. Holloway shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Inside the palace, Commander Torres led a team to the throne room. They found High Empress Valeth sitting on her throne of black stone, surrounded by the bodies of her guards. She had not fled. She had not hidden. She had simply waited for the end to come. Torres approached her slowly, weapon raised. But the old Empress made no move to attack. She just looked at the human woman with tired, empty eyes. "You have won," Valeth said quietly. "The Empire falls. Everything we built for 12,000 years, gone in less than 2. I hope you are proud." Torres did not flinch. "I'm not proud. I'm just glad it's over." She reached for her communicator. "Admiral Holloway, this is Torres. We have the Empress. She's surrendering." There was silence on the line for a long moment. Then Holloway's voice came through, calm and steady. "Bring her out. Let the galaxy see. The Valorian Empire is dead." And so it was. The galaxy had changed forever. News of the Valorian defeat spread across 1,000 worlds, carried by ships and signals that moved faster than light. Species that had lived in fear for millennia looked up at the stars and saw something new. Hope. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for days. People danced in the streets of every city. Fireworks lit up the skies from New York to Tokyo, From London to Sydney, humanity had faced its greatest test and emerged victorious. They had defeated an empire that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. But the leaders knew that victory was only the beginning. The hard work of building peace would take much longer than the war itself. Admiral Jack Morrison, the man who had fired the first shots at Mars, was promoted to Supreme Commander of Allied Forces. It was a title that did not exist before the war. Now it carried the weight of 100 species looking to humanity for guidance. Morrison stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly on a space station built at the center of what had once been Valorian territory. Representatives from over 100 species sat before him. Some were tall and thin, others were short and covered in scales. Some breathed air. Others lived in tanks of water or chambers filled with strange gases. They were all different, but they had all come for the same reason. They wanted to know what came next. "We didn't ask for this war," Morrison said, his voice echoing through the great hall. "We didn't want it. When we first looked up at the stars, we hoped to find friends. Instead, we found an empire that wanted to enslave us." He paused, looking at the faces around him. He saw fear in some eyes, suspicion in others. These species had lived under Valorian rule for generations. They did not know if humanity would be any different, but when the Empire struck first, we had only one choice: to show them, and everyone watching, that humanity will never be conquered, we will never surrender, and we will always protect those who cannot protect themselves. A murmur went through the assembly. Some species had expected threats. Others had expected demands for tribute. Instead, the human was offering protection, partnership, something the Valorians had never offered. Dr. Laura Chen, humanity's ambassador to the new Galactic Council, worked day and night to turn Morrison's words into reality. She was a small woman with gray-streaked black hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down her nose. She had spent her career as a diplomat, solving conflicts between nations on Earth. Now she was solving conflicts between species across the galaxy. It was not easy work. Some species wanted revenge against the Valorians. Others wanted to claim Valorian territory for themselves. Old rivalries between conquered peoples threatened to erupt into new wars. Chen navigated these dangerous waters with patience and skill. "We cannot build peace on hatred," she told the Crix delegation when they demanded the execution of all Valorian prisoners. "If we become like our enemies, then the Empire wins, even in defeat." The Crix leader, the same one who had welcomed Colonel Price years before, clicked her mandibles in frustration. But she listened. She understood. Trade agreements were signed. Mutual defense pacts were created. Cultural exchanges began between species that had never spoken to each other before. Slowly, carefully, a new order was taking shape. But humanity did not forget the lessons of the war. Even as they built peace, they kept their fleets ready. The dreadnoughts that had destroyed the Valorian armadas still patrolled the borders of human space. The weapons that had erased enemy ships from existence were maintained and improved. New soldiers were trained every year, ready to fight if the need arose. Some species found this frightening. They whispered that humans were just as dangerous as the Valorians. That one day, Earth would try to conquer the galaxy for itself. Morrison addressed these concerns directly at the third annual meeting of the Galactic Assembly. "I understand your fear," he said. "You look at our weapons and see the tools of empire. You look at our soldiers and see conquerors waiting to strike. You wonder if you have traded one master for another." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting the eyes of every representative in the room. "But here is the difference. The Valorians struck first. They attacked without warning. They enslaved without mercy. We only fought back. We only freed those in chains. And when the war was over, we did not demand tribute. We did not claim territory. We offered our hand in friendship." He raised that hand now, palm open and empty. "This hand can hold a weapon. It can also hold the hand of a friend. The choice is yours. We have proven what we can do in war. Now let us prove what we can do in peace." Years passed. The scars of war slowly healed. The former Valorian worlds were rebuilt. now free to govern themselves. The species that had fought together against the Empire grew closer, bound by trade and treaty and shared experience. On Earth, a memorial garden was built outside the United Nations headquarters. It was a quiet place, filled with trees and flowers from 100 different worlds. At its center stood a simple stone monument, carrying the names of every human who had died in the war. Below the names, a plaque carried words that defined humanity's place among the stars. We came in peace. We left in war. We returned with justice. Strike us at your peril. Every year, on the anniversary of the first attack, leaders from across the galaxy gathered at this memorial. They came to remember those who had fallen. They came to celebrate the freedom that had been won, and they came to remind themselves of the price of tyranny. High Empress Valeth lived out her remaining years in a comfortable prison on a distant moon. She was allowed visitors, and scholars came from many worlds to interview her. They wanted to understand how an empire could be so cruel, how millions could be enslaved by thousands. She never gave them satisfying answers. Perhaps she did not understand it herself. When she finally died, few mourned her passing. The galaxy had moved on. The Valorian Empire was already becoming ancient history, a story told to children as a warning against cruelty and conquest. And throughout the galaxy, a new saying spread. It was spoken in 100 different languages, on 1,000 different worlds. It became a promise and a warning, a reminder of what had happened when one species tried to conquer another. Never strike humanity first, for they will make sure you never strike anyone again. The stars watched over the galaxy as they always had. But now, somewhere among those stars, a small blue planet stood ready to protect the innocent, ready to punish the wicked, ready to show the universe that some species were not meant to be conquered. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, and it would never let go.